أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلقه وخاتم أنبيائه وسيد رسله سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المطهرين المكرمين. قال الله العظيم في كتابه الكريم وهو أحسن القائلين وأصدق الصادقين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولقد صرفنا في هذا القرآن للناس من كل مثل وكان الإنسان أكثر شيء جدلا. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the purification of the souls, the enlightenment of the hearts, for the hastening of the reappearance of Baqiyatullah al-A'zam Ruhi wa Arwah al-Alameen lahu al-Fida, enlighten your souls and the atmosphere with the recitation of salawat upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Respected mu'mineen, Salaam alaykum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Shahr Ramadhan has some outstanding features and beautiful opportunities for each and every one of us, but without a shadow of a doubt, one thing that draws us towards this blessed, spectacular month is the connection with the Holy Quran, as the narration of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhum as-salam emphasized that it is Rabi'ul Quran, it's the spring of the Holy Quran. And there are a number of ways to study the Holy Quran in the month of Ramadan and outside the month of Ramadan. The traditional, conventional method of looking at the commentary or examining the meanings of the blessed, beautiful ayat of the Holy Quran is chapter by chapter analysis. This usually is how many people would go through the Holy Quran and its understanding, which is absolutely fine, and it's a method used by many of the commentators and mufassirin. There is also a thematic approach towards tafsir, which is looking at the subject by subject base, analyzing how the Quran looks at a number of important areas within the lives of human beings and referring to the ayat that discuss this. There is a third way, which is not often looked at perhaps, but it's also effective, and that is to reflect upon the tools that the Quran uses to get its message across. What do we mean by tools? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our creator. He knows what you and I use in our daily lives to communicate and to effectively understand each other. For example, one way that we use to emphasize something is qasam, to say that I swear by something. That highlights a means of emphasis. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses qasam in the Holy Quran. And there are ayat that needs to be looked at when it comes to this particular tool. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us stories of the Quran. There are stories of the prophets, there are non-prophetic stories. An individual is able to enter the beautiful endless ocean of the meanings of the Holy Quran through the narratives. And this is effective sometimes for our younger children, the youth, especially looking at contemporary challenges and relating them to some of these stories. One tool that I'd like to look at, inshallah ta'ala, in these few days that we are blessed to be together, is parables, al-amthal, in the Holy Quran. In over 50 places in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses parables, amthal, similitudes. And this is a tool that you and I use in our daily lives to simplify something and to explain something more effectively to someone else. If I'm trying to analyze a subject or a issue, usually I use examples. I say to someone, for example, it's like this, or its example is like this. And usually that brings the idea closer to the mindset of that individual. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran, in a number of places, 15 ayat like this. He says, وَلَقَدْ صَرَفْنَا فِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ مِنْ كُلِّ مَثَلٍ. Allah says, in this Quran, we have utilized a number of parables, examples, similitudes. And indeed, Allah says, regarding this, human beings are struggling. Despite the simplification of some concepts and ideas Quranically, He says, وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرُ شَيْءٍ جَدَلًا in Surah Kahf, verse number 54. That despite this, despite the attempts to get the message across, human beings are constantly either refusing, or they are ignorant, or they are arrogant in the acceptance of the message. Now, what is the purpose of these amthal in the Holy Quran? What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trying to get us to appreciate? There is an interesting 3-step process that we can look at in the Holy Quran regarding parables. The first is so that people are awakened. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in Surah Ibrahim verse 25. Allah says, وَيَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ الْأَمْثَالَ لِلنَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ. Allah is saying the first reason why I am using examples in the Quran is because human beings are heedless, absent-minded. We need to wake them up. We need to shake them. We need to make them more alert. And this is an important initiative or beginning before the process of understanding. Sometimes when people are not grasping certain ideas and concepts, there needs to be a pre-step, which is to alert them and to make them aware before making them understand. It's very important. Sometimes when it comes to, for example, the wilayah of Ahl al-Bayt, alayhim salam, there are people who say, I speak to certain individuals from other schools of thought, and they are not able to understand what I am saying. I am presenting evidence regarding the superiority of the Ahl al-Bayt, but it's not getting through. There is a barrier, because there is ghafla, there is heedlessness that needs to be first broken before the understanding can happen in the heart. That penetration is not being achieved because there is an obstacle. And I believe this obstacle, when it comes to wilayah, comes from here, not here. The idea of understanding the maqam and the status of the Ahl al-Bayt needs to start with the love of Ahl al-Bayt, which is genuine. Then it will follow on when it comes to understanding their status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what is it that we need to do? Many people try to start this conversation through presenting logical evidence, rational evidence, Quranic evidence, evidence from hadith, to try and, for example, establish the superiority of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But in reality, it may not be effective if an individual has not yet conquered their heart through ishq or at least some form of mahabba of Ali Muhammad. This is why many a times one of the paths towards wilayah of Ahl al-Bayt, to initiate it, is not to start through the superiority of Amir al-Mu'mineen over others. One of the best ways is to begin the conversation using Karbala. Because Karbala, there is an emotional element to it. So an individual, when they begin to understand 10th of Muharram and Ashura, their heart soften. When their heart soften, you have already eradicated or removed that barrier to be able to then penetrate the heart and understand the wilayah of Ali Muhammad. Hence, it is such an effective tool. But one of the many tools that we have. So, the first element is this tadhakkur that needs to happen. Quran says amthal is because of this. Number two, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ نَضْرِبُهَا لِلنَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So, earlier it was لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ. Now, in Surah Al-Hashr, verse number 21, Allah says, it is for them to ponder and indeed reflect. When an individual is now ready to utilize their intellectual ability, the parable, the similitude will make them think. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nas dhuriba mathalun fastami'u lah. O people, here is an example, listen to it. إن الذين تدعون من دون الله لن يخلقوا ذبابا ولو اجتمعوا له. Those who you call besides God, they will not be able to create or bring anything into existence, even the smallest of God's creation. So here, Allah says, I'm giving an example, but an example that you can utilize for the process of reflection, contemplation and pondering. That how can you worship any other than Allah, but you cannot even create the smallest creation of God that you can see, dhubab. And incidentally, one of the amthal in the Quran that we will analyze in detail in case a question is coming to you in your head now, and that is calling any other than Allah. The process of istighatha. When I say Ya Ali or Ya Hussein, Ya Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha, help me. Is this part of what the Quran is saying, don't call anyone other than Allah? Or is it a practice that is rooted in the Quran and in the teachings of Ahlul Bayt? We will come to that in detail in one of the days, inshallah ta'ala, because it's related to some of the amthal in the Holy Quran. Once there is tadhakkur, then there is tafakkur, then there is a third level that the amthal seeks to establish for human beings, for each and every individual. In Surah Ankabut 29, verse number 43, Allah says, وَتِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ نَضْرِبُهَا لِلنَّاسِ. Now, these examples are given to human beings, not only to believers. Then Allah says, وَمَا يَعْقِلُهَا إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ. But the real understanding of it will not be reached except those who are deeply enriched in ilm and knowledge. Very interesting, this one. You might think it's easy to grasp the concept of example, parable. We have just given one. The issue of al-dhubaba, the fly. I have understood it. Allah saying, no, you will not understand it fully except if you are an alim. Alim here refers to an individual with deep knowledge. One of the ways in which we can understand this is by referring to a number of ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt that talk about what is the reality of these amthal, for example, and how should it be understood. This is a riwayah from Imam Ja'far ibn Mohammed al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. He says to a man by the name of Dawood ibn Kathir, he says, Ya Dawood, inna Allah khalaqana fa akrama khalqana. Allah has created us, the Ahlul Bayt, and He has honored us with a special creation. Wa faddalana wa ja'alana umana'ih. He has made us His trusted confidants, and He has honored us specially. Wa khuzzanih wa hafadhatih ala ma fi as-samawati wa fi al-ard. وَجَعَلَ لَنَا أَضْدَادًا وَأَعْدَاءً. He has made us special on this earth and on the heavens, and He has made enemies that are known to be our enemies. Listen to this. فَسَمَّانَا فِي كِتَابِهِ. He has named us in His book. وَكَنَّا عَنْ أَسْمَائِنَا بِأَحْسَنِ الْأَسْمَاءِ وَأَحَبِّهَا إِلَيْهِ. And He has used parables in the Quran in reference to us in the best possible way. Then He says, وَسَمَّى أَضْدَادُنَا وَأَعْدَاؤُنَا فِي كِتَابِهِ وَكَنَّا عَنْ أَسْمَائِهِمْ وضرب لهم الأمثال في كتابه في بعض الأسماء إليه. But also in the Quran, Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam says, Allah has used parables to refer to our enemies, to those who are against us. And hence you recognize that there is what? There is a deeper understanding of some of these ayat that goes more than what is meets the eye for certain people. Hence we find what? We find the Imam alayhi salam narrating from his great grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. This interesting hadith in which Imam alayhi salam says, نزل القرآن أرباعا. Quran is divided into 4 segments. ربع فينا, a quarter of it regarding us, the Ahl al-Bayt. A quarter of it regarding us, Ahl al-Bayt. وَرُبْعٌ فِي عَدُوِّنَا, and a quarter of the Quran is about the enemies of Ahl al-Bayt. وَرُبْعٌ سُنَنٌ وَأَمْثَالٌ, and another quarter is parables and examples and teachings. وَرُبْعٌ فَرَائِضْ وَأَحْكَامٌ, and the final quarter is laws, yes, and obligatory deeds. You can now begin to understand that the concept and the subject of parables in the Quran is very critical and indeed quite important. Now, as human beings, one of the effective tools in modern day behavioral psychology is to create images or visualizations for people to see in order to link to a concept or belief or an idea. So sometimes if there is an abstract notion, if it's presented to us in a drawing or a movie or some kind of animation, we begin to understand it better. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses amthal in the Quran, parables, so that these images are created in our minds, are there so that we can visualize certain concepts and digest it a bit better, absorb it a bit better. It's one of the tools in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is manifested, so that we are able to get closer to the inner and deeper meanings of the Holy Quran. That's why in Al-Kulayni, in Al-Kafi by Kulayni rahmatullahi alayh, he narrates that a lady entered and asked to meet Imam Ja'far ibn Mohammed al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. فأذن لها, she was given permission. فقالت يا أبا عبد الله ما معنى زيتون لا شرقية ولا غربية. This is in Surah An-Nur. الله نور السماوات والأرض مثل نوره كمشكات. Yes, where Allah gives the parable, the example of His light. Allah is the illuminating light of the heavens and the earth. She says, Ya ibn Rasulillah, what is the meaning of this? I don't understand it. This idea that it is what? It's like the color of the olive. It is not from the east or from the west. It's not from the right or on the left. Yes? Imam alayhi salam looks at her, and the first thing he says to her, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمْ يَضْرِبُ الْأَمْثَالَ لِلشَّجَرِ. Allah has not given these parables for the trees. إِنَّمَا ضَرَبَ الْأَمْثَالُ لِبَنِي آدَمَ. No, he says, the first thing, that this is for you and I. There is a need to reflect on them. These examples are given for a purpose, for a reason, and there is a need to unravel their secrets, unravel their beauty. And inshallah ta'ala, we will select and we will have 12 of these parables from 50 that exist in the Quran. But I have selected these 12 based on common, modern, contemporary challenges that we face in our societies across the world. Some theological matters, some jurisprudential elements, some spiritual tips in these verses of Amthal, parables, and inshallah we will analyze them on a daily basis so that we can become Ahlul Quran. And we end with this beautiful hadith from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, which says, on the day of Qiyamah, Ahlul Quran urafa'u Ahlul Jannah. One of the beautiful descriptions for the people of the Quran. He says, those who consider themselves or are then labeled as the people of the Quran will have the deepest understanding in paradise, the deepest cognizance in Jannah. This ma'rifah that you and I seek in this world, man arifa nafsah faqad arafa rabbah, has another rich, sweet meaning in Jannah when you begin to understand more than some others what the beauty and the pleasures of Allah is, because the sweetness there is much more profound when it is felt rather than physical. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَرِضْوَانٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرٌ. In the description of paradise in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the feeling that the people of Jannah will have when they have that cognizance of Allah is much more spectacular and enjoyable than the feeling of the food and the drink and the other pleasures of paradise. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created that existence with that ability for the human being to have that deeper essence and joy. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of the people of Quran, Ahlul Quran, and enable us to unravel its secrets and its beauties in this month of Quran, insha'Allah ta'ala. If there are any questions, I've been advised that if there are any questions at the end, we are more than happy, insha'Allah ta'ala, to take any questions to start. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you with the barakah of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.